Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. An industry trade group says President Donald Trump's action to shut down a major source of federal capital will have severe and lasting impacts on nearly 100 Native institutions that finance housing and small businesses, among many other projects. It's part of Trump's response to the federal government shutdown that's in its third week. We'll hear about some of the consequences of the government shutdown for tribes and Native organizations right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. With fire season winding down across many parts of the U.S., it's not unusual to find people doing deliberate burns to eliminate slash or improve habitat. Outside Eugene, Oregon recently, a group of Native youth and state and tribal agencies conducted a cultural burn. Brian Bull of Buffalo's Fire reports.
5 interns with the Longtom Watershed Council's traditional ecological inquiry program and a few dozen staff members, fire bosses, and agency employees gathered at the Chilamali Reserve. The Oak Savannah here provided 3 acres for the interns to apply their knowledge of fire as a tool.
I have learned that a small spark can start a whole field of flames.
Kaneem Cushman Whiteeyes is with the Chinook Indian Nation and a middle schooler. He's setting fire to a meadow with a flaming pitch stick, while water trucks and crews of shovels stand by to help keep it within the designated area.
The best thing about using fire is that you can learn so much about it in like a little amount of time, and it can be very healthy for the land.
Nearby, TEIP's program manager, Rachel Cushman, helps her other son, Isaac, set a few fires and keep aware of his surroundings. Fire can reduce acorn weevils or help coniferous trees reseed the area. Cushman says this part of the Willamette Valley has always been a fire-formed landscape.
It's been unhealthy because fire's been missing, and so we're awakening the land, we're building that relationship back up and healing it through this practice of cultural fire.
A few yards away, TEIP's curriculum director, Joe Scott, helps a few interns extend the fire closer to a camas meadow. Scott is a Siletz tribal member who did a training exchange with the Yurok tribe. Now he's applying all of his accumulated experience to teach the TEIP interns about good fire.
Youth have come up seeing fire as the enemy, as a destructive force, and this is a perfect example of fire being a constructive force.
Scott says with the fall rains, ash and nutrients will replenish the soil and help the camas prosper. For National Native News, I'm Brian Bull, near Eugene.
10 women will be inducted into the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame Tuesday, including Jocelyn Estes, a pioneering Alaska Native journalist. Estes most recently was a national correspondent for Indian Country Today and also worked as news director at KMBA. Estes is Tlingit with ties to Wrangell, but she's not the only Alaska Native to be honored.
Another Alaska Native is my great-grandmother, Tilly Paul Tamery. She was a civil rights leader in the early 20th century.
Estes says it's an honor to be inducted along with her great-grandmother. 2 other Alaska Natives are being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Catherine Gottlieb, a Supiaq leader in Native healthcare who served 30 years as president of South Central Foundation. The late Ada Blackjack Johnson is also being recognized. Johnson was a Nupiaq and the sole survivor of a doomed Arctic expedition in the 1920s. Tribes across the country are recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month and sharing resources, including the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma. The Chickasaw Nation Department of Family Services says it offers support, including domestic violence prevention and intervention, with a focus on tribal cultural values. The Chickasaw Nation also operates a shelter. A candlelight vigil is planned Thursday for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Chickasaw Nation Director of Violence Prevention, Janie Locke, says one of the most important things they want to communicate is that victims are not alone and services are available. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Amerind, Indian Country's 100% tribally owned insurance partner. Information on property, liability, workers' compensation, and commercial auto needs at amerind.com.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. $500 million in federal money that institutions leverage for projects like tribal housing construction and small business development could disappear overnight. That's if President Donald Trump keeps with his intention to permanently dissolve the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund and eliminate staff that administers it in response to the ongoing federal government shutdown. Without the CDFI fund, many tribal lending institutions will be forced to go dark until they can come up with an alternative plan. And it will be the end of a major source of capital for small business loans and housing construction projects. The government shutdown could also exacerbate problems accessing healthcare, law enforcement, tribal government functions, and even tourism. You can join our conversation today. Just give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let us know, how is the federal shutdown impacting you and your community? 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Lenore, Idaho is Kim Pate. She is the managing director of the Indian Fund. She's a descendant of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. Kim, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning, Sean, and thank you, and thanks to Native America Calling for having me on today.
Absolutely. Joining us from Pendleton, Oregon is Dave Tovey. He is the executive director of Niktiyaway Community Financial Services. He's a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Dave, good morning to you as well. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Joining us from Omaha, Nebraska is Larry Wright Jr. He is the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians and former chairman of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. Larry, hello. Welcome back to the show. It's always good to have you.
Yes. Happy to be here. Appreciate this. Look forward to the conversation.
I am too. And our fourth guest joins us from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Sherry Rupert. She is the CEO of the American Indigenous Tourism Association, previously named the American Indian and Alaska Native Tourism Association. She is Paiute and Washoe. Sherry, welcome to the show. You've been here before. It's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us. And Kim, I want to begin with you today. Let's talk specifically about CDFI funds to kick off the show. President Trump has eliminated about 100 federal Treasury staff that administers the CDFI fund in reaction to the government shutdown. Are those layoffs affecting what you do?
Absolutely. The federal government shutdown that began on October 1 really kicked this off. And now combining with these unprecedented reductions in force, it really feels like a direct assault on our sovereignty and economic self-determination. I mean, the Treasury's CDFI fund was designed to increase access to safe and affordable financial products and services. And it's been our lifeline for grants, technical assistance, and our certifications. So it's effectively been gutted. And, for us, this isn't just bureaucracy. It's a crisis that threatens to shutter our native CDFIs and stall the economic progress in our communities. And we don't even know how long that would be.
Kim, what about also the federal shutdown? How does that play into the president's actions? Are there additional challenges with the government just not being open right now?
Yes. Some of our native CDFIs have received what we call technical assistance awards from the CDFI fund, which have been designed for emerging Native CDFIs like mine, Indian Fund, to be able to build the skills of our staff, to do market surveys to understand what the real needs in our communities are, to do community engagement from youth all the way to elders to make sure that everyone in our community at least understands what Native CDFIs are and what we can do to close all of the financial products and services gaps that exist in our places, which in a lot of Indian country are effectively financial deserts because we don't have any financial services other than Native CDFIs, which again were designed to provide capital for businesses, for people to go back to school, to buy a home, all of the things that create tribal sovereignty and long-term, success for our peoples.
Mm-hmm. Kim, the president is pushing to permanently eliminate the CDFI fund. What would that mean for the Indian Fund?
Well, the CDFI fund, as I mentioned, is really our lifeblood. And to lose that major part of our infrastructure is a little bit like taking out a leg of a stool. We do still have the need for federal subsidy to be able to fund the projects that need to get funded and to keep the projects that were already funded that are now in limbo alive. And the shutdown just was the beginning. To really effectively eliminate the CDFI fund completely would devastate our communities. The CDFI fund has been around for, about 20 years now, and to all of a sudden abruptly end it reminds me a little bit about how during Trump's first administration, the Assets for Independence program, which was a matched savings account program that effectively allowed our indigenous communities to survive the mortgage meltdown from 2008 to 2009 with these savings accounts that allowed people to continue to stay in their homes and pay their mortgages and keep their business stores alive. It just reminds me of that. Once we lost that program, we lost a major source of support for our entrepreneurs and our homeowners in Indian country. And I just see that happening again, but even worse.
Kim, let's talk more about our entrepreneurs and homeowners in Indian country and what these funding issues really mean at the community level. What is the impact ultimately on Native-owned businesses, small businesses, and others who rely on your loan products and developmental services?
So if there's not any products and developmental services available from our organization or the 64 other Native CDFIs across Indian country, they will have nowhere to go to raise capital to start their businesses or expand them. And I imagine seeing a rollback across the country and a severe decline in entrepreneurship and homeownership levels in our communities. So we would be losing the gains that we worked so hard for decades. They would just be wiped out almost overnight. So we are working really, really hard to make sure that we're doing our best to support the funds that are being made available in our communities and to add to them. This is also a moment where we can say, clearly we can't rely on the federal sources of support anymore because they are in the balance, but we can turn to private sources of funding and begin to bring new people into the field that care about this work, including Indigenous peoples who would like to have a way to support the future for their communities.
What are you hearing from your colleagues who manage other Native CDFIs? What are their most pressing concerns?
Well, Sean, I will tell you, I know several CDFI leaders who have had to lay off their entire staff and almost close their doors. So you have one person doing at least three people's jobs, sometimes more, just to keep the funding alive that we have received. We have a responsibility to the people that gave us capital to invest in communities, whether it's a foundation or the CDFI fund, which, by the way, we're still reporting to, even though the doors are closed and the staff are not working, and also to other individual donors who care deeply about the investments they've already made. So we've got to keep some level of activity going to be a good fiduciary of the capital that we've received, and also to make sure that our borrowers have someone to talk to. There's a lot of concern among Native entrepreneurs and homeowners, et cetera, right now. What's going to happen to their funding? What's going to happen to their businesses? We don't have answers.
What about the ripple effects on other community programs and services, Kim? I'm thinking about maybe tribal clinics and schools. Is there an impact there as well?
Yes, I do think that especially tribal clinics that have major funding flows from the federal government are also potentially going to suffer because of the federal shutdown and the loss of federal grants and loans that, by the way, started a while ago when, for example, we lost our EPA greenhouse gas reduction fund program sources of funds, and it's just been going on since, let's say, earlier this year. And I think this is true for the education component that funds our Indigenous places, as well as the health and human services, policing. So much is on the line right now.
Kim Pate with Indian Fund, Managing Director of the Indian Fund, kicking off our conversation here today on Native America Calling. We were talking about the future of the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. You might be familiar with the acronym or the abbreviation CDFI. They exist in many Native communities. They provide lending services and other business development services. They teach classes as well to get people ready to own businesses, help people with their personal finances. They provide a lot of services. We're learning about what they do and also what the impact of the shutdown and apparently what could possibly happen if the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund is permanently dissolved. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and we'll talk with Dave Tovey in Pendleton, Oregon, and he also manages the CDFI, and we'll get his perspective as well. You can join this conversation with questions and comments, 1-800-996-2848 or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. Pick up that phone. We want to hear from the listeners. Let's go ahead and get some calls going. 10 months after his release from federal prison, 81-year-old Leonard Peltier remains energized to unite Native Americans for a common cause. The man, who is synonymous with Native activism, sees familiar threats to sovereignty that he fought against when he entered prison a half-century ago. We'll talk with Leonard Peltier on the next Native America Calling.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com.
We're glad you're with us today on Native America Calling. We're getting updates on the effects of the federal government shutdown, including the elimination of a U.S. Treasury fund that some tribal communities rely on to pay for housing projects and business development. You can join today's conversation as well. Just call us at 1-800-996-2848. That's 1-800-99-NATIVE. Dave Tovey joins us now from Pendleton, Oregon, where he is the executive director of Nikt Yahweh Community Financial Services. And Dave, we heard from Kim earlier. How are the recent layoffs of Treasury staff within the CDFI fund affecting your operations?
Well, it's just uncertain right now where what happens next. Certainly there's a money aspect. We had an award of what they call a financial assistance award, and that's the seed capital that flows into our portfolios. So about half of that is still with Treasury, so we don't know where that is going to end up, as well as we were recently awarded a $200,000 technical assistance award, so that as well. On top of that, all of us had to go in and do recertification. So we have our recertification application in, and was pending. So not sure where that is, but the CDFI fund. I mean, they were always understaffed. There's only about, I think, 102 employees that were pretty unceremoniously fired Friday before last, and we just hope that something can be sorted out as soon as possible. We've had such good positive congressional support from both sides of the aisle, as well as even Treasury Secretary Bezant was supportive of our work. So I guess we're just all on pins and needles, thinking and hoping for the very best, and certainly not full shutdown, and clawing back these scant resources from our communities.
Dave, do you have any prospects for new funding sources to offset these current challenges?
I think a lot of us have been pretty effective at leveraging. I know I'm the president of the Affiliate Tribes Northwest Indians Economic Development Corporation, and the loans we've gotten by way of the State Small Business Credit Initiative, I think, are 8-to-1. Our organization too, heavily leverages our projects, and I think we're probably close to that same number. This little money that comes from the CDFI fund is really intended to be that, just seed capital, along with our certification, kind of puts the good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will, on our organizations, because those certification standards are pretty rigorous. And the intent of that was to make sure we're a good investment vehicle for other kind of foundations or bank partnerships.
Let's talk more about the certifications you mentioned, because in addition to funding, the Treasury Department also regulates how Native CDFIs operate. Can you provide a brief overview of why those regulations are important, and how's that all being carried out during this shutdown?
I suppose it's not. So, okay. But I think the regulations are pretty stringent. In fact, some of my colleagues, when we get together, we kind of grumble about them. Saying, I think we're regulated as heavily as a bank or a credit union. But nonetheless, those standards are there. And of course, with the change in administration, there's been some modifications to those certification standards, including anything that has to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. So any allusion to any racial groups has to be kind of written out of your certification application. Almost unbelievably, the administration recognized that tribes and tribal CDFIs are different insofar as having a political standing rather than a racial standing. So we've been given a pass so far. But of course, the other one is clean energy, which has been asked to be removed too. And along with that impact of what Kim just mentioned with the greenhouse gas funds. The Native American, the National CDFI Network had secured a large $400 million program for green energy development among its membership, and that was yanked back too. So I think every day there's just a new what's going to be pulled back again from our little corners of the world.
Well, we mentioned earlier that the future elimination of the CDFI fund, that is another possibility, of course, based on the current state of affairs. Dave, how likely do you think that scenario is? And would it be possible for Native CDFIs to operate without the CDFI fund and a federal regulatory framework?
Boy, that's a great question. I think, and we've had, because it's only been a week, and last week was the AT&I annual convention up in Suquamish, but there's been a little conversation, a little bit of speculation. I think as nonprofits and being a nonprofit loan fund, if you will, We could probably operate for a time. With or without certification, I think is going to become the question of whether investors and foundations and so forth would look at us as worthy anymore. But you look at other models across the Indian country of kind of this shared sovereignty, and I'm thinking like the gaming industry and healthcare and education, kind of form our own collective institutions for certification or resources or so forth. We might be forced into something like that, which is an exciting but daunting kind of outlook. But I don't think anybody's willing to just give up. And again, you never know. I mean, we all have to deal with these political pendulum swings, and I don't know how permanent any closure might be. With another administration coming in and seeing the value of what we do.
The goal of every CDFI is to ultimately be self-sustaining, generating revenue from loans, other products and services. How close is Nitshiaway Community Financial Services to becoming fully self-sustaining? I think a couple years. Part of what we've done is, some of our major projects we've been converting to more revenue-producing things like building homes and selling them that we're doing with the Nitshiaway neighborhood, as well as our own food truck park. Trying to generate revenue and service that those small businesses, and both of those have revenue impacts that could really bolster our development services. I think we're still kind of in that crunch and grant reliant, but we're working hard every day to try to get to that point to where we can have enough capital out there and loan revenue coming in, and really generating enough revenue for full operations. And what about native CDFIs who might not be in that position 2 years out like you describe? An inability to reach the goal of being self-sustaining. Does that potentially make CDFIs a political target like what's happening in this case?
Oh, I tell you, what a terrifying thought. I think a lot of CDFIs across the country, not just native, but all, are looking at ways to have mergers and, kind of co-locate back office, accounting, loan underwriting, so forth, in shared services. There might be more of that, but, I look at my colleague, Native CDFIs here in the Northwest. We'd formed the Northwest Native Lending Network. It has about 16 current certified or developing Native CDFIs and loan programs in the Northwest, and so many of them are 1-2 person shops that, that future's seems bleak with a full shutdown.
All right, Dave, thank you. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number to join today's conversation. Do you have a CDFI in your native community? Have you ever gone to a CDFI for a loan or maybe a financial education class or some sort of business development training? Let us know. How did it work out for you, and what are your concerns with current challenges facing the CDFI fund? 1-800-996-2848. Let's speak now with Larry Wright Jr. He is the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians, and he joins us from Omaha, Nebraska. Larry, hello again. Welcome to the show. And I know that NCI issued a statement saying the administration's action to hobble the CDFI fund would significantly and permanently affect Native communities. What effects is NCI most worried about?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you again for having me. And I think to Kim and Dave's comments, we echo those as, specific examples. And knowing how important Native CDFIs are through Indian country, these actions will no doubt result in clawback of funding that's necessary to increase access to much needed capital in Indian country. And I think in some estimations, we're talking about $500 million in investments to Indian country. By extension, these RIFs We'll also have impacts on the new markets tax credits program and the USDA Section 502 Native Relending program, and NCAI in conjunction with our partners really does support calls for the administration to rescind those RIFs and for Congress to hold an oversight hearing on the basic legality of those RIFs and retain and protect the funding for this program and ensure FY 2026 appropriations package contains funding to support the retention of CDF funding for staff. And I was just at the Center for Indian Country Development conference here recently, and learned this statistic, which I think really speaks to the heart of this program, that lenders of CDFI programs actually have less of a default rate than typical financial institutions. So we know that the impact this has on Indian business owners, small business owners, and the impact that it has for Indian country is tremendously valuable. And these RIFs just really hit at the heart of that. And one of the things that we're happy about is, and we appreciate the bipartisan group of members in Congress that have been standing with Indian country and CDFIs throughout this process and protecting the integrity of the CDFI fund. And we'll continue to work with them to help protect that.
Larry, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we heard from Dave Tovey earlier mention bipartisan support for CDFIs. Is NCAI's work to have tribal voices heard by this administration having a positive impact?
Yeah, and I think in no small part, we can't underscore or understate the efforts of Congressman Tom Cole, who is chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and for those that may not know, is also a member of the Chickasaw Nation, and has really been a hard advocate for Indian country on this issue and others. But the importance but still being able to garner that bipartisan support to help on this issue specifically, but on other funding issues impacting Indian country.
Were there any indications that the CDFI programs were vulnerable? And if so, what type of groundwork was done ahead of time to protect them from potential political attacks?
I think from the beginning of this administration, everybody, after some of those initial executive orders came out, and Dave mentioned the DEI, and that was kind of the first volley of kind of including Indian country into some of these programs that should never have been, and including us into that DEI framework where Indian country and tribal nations are not DEI in nature. We are a political minority in this country. We're not a racial minority, and we have that government-to-government relationship, and the federal government has that treaty and trust responsibility. So these issues that Indian country has found themselves in, I think every organization in Indian country that focuses on their particular issue, it might be one issue, but it impacts all of us. I think everybody was very, very keen on looking at the potential of, if this happens now, what's next, and how do we start working to protect ourselves and get ready for any potential fight. And I think, that was fairly clear from the outset. And so I think the Native CDFI network was very active in doing that as well, and as well as our partner organizations on different issues. But for sure, when we talk about this and the impact that it has directly on Native lenders and who rely on this program for their small businesses and and work is critically important.
Larry, we've got about a minute before we have to take our next break. This is now the 21st day of the federal shutdown. How are you seeing tribes respond?
Well, I think it's just like what's been said. Tribes aren't sitting back, and efforts are there, and our efforts at NCAI on behalf of tribes and with tribal nations and with our partner organizations have been very clear that we're going to advocate on all of these levels and make sure that the federal government does. Tribal sovereignty is not an option. It's not a suggestion. It's inherent in our relationship in this country with the treaty and trust responsibilities. And at every turn, Indian country continues to educate and advocate for those rights and responsibilities that the federal government has. And whatever specific subject it is, when it comes to funding that is laid out in those treaties, Indian country is very adamant in making sure that those are followed through and those commitments are being honored as they should.
Larry Wright Jr., Executive Director of the National Congress of American Indians. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and continue our conversation. And we have the phone lines open for listeners who would like to join us. 1-800-996-2848.
Support for journalism that raises the awareness of child well-being to citizens and to policymakers provided by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, building a brighter future for children, families, and communities. Information at aecf.org.
Now more than ever, the supporters of this and all Native One programs deserve a little extra love. Learn more about all our public radio underwriters and web-based sponsors at kowanik.org/supporters-spotlight.
Thanks for tuning in today to Native America Calling. We're hearing about the mounting problems for tribal communities in light of the federal government shutdown. What effects of the shutdown are you seeing where you live in your community? Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's talk now with Sherry Rupert. She joins us from Nevada. She is the CEO of the American Indigenous Tourism Association. And Sherry, welcome again to the show. Now, we've been talking so far about community development, financial institutions, and effects of the government shutdown impact industries and places one might not associate with the federal government. Tell us more. What types of federal funding for Native tourism is currently stalled because of the shutdown?
Good morning, and thanks again for having me this morning. In regard to funding for the shutdown, of course, grants that were going out from specifically the U.S. Forest Service for tourism development, of course, have been stalled. Other funding as well. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the national parks and funding that has been shut down for those parks. And many of our indigenous communities are the gateway communities to these national parks. These parks were once our homes. And these gateway communities are losing up to $80 million in visitor spending every day. The parks are also losing up to $1 million in visitor fee revenue. So that also affects our tribal communities that have tourism entities and our indigenous-owned businesses as well in those park areas.
Can you give us some examples of some of these specific parks that you describe as gateways to Native communities, and also some tribes who are being especially impacted by the shutdown and access to the parks?
Right. So some of those gateway communities and tribes, for example, are around all of the parks, but some that come to mind are Grand Canyon National Parks. There are many Indigenous-owned businesses surrounding the park, the Wallapai tribe, the Navajo Nation, the Hopis, all around the park there. And when there's reduced visitors and reduced visitor spending, that also affects their enterprises. Up at Glacier National Park, we have Blackfeet-owned tour operations that are up there as well that are affected when there's decreased visitors.
Is there any bright side here? I'm thinking maybe the public is choosing native tourism options since federal parks are less functional. Because, of course, many tribal communities offer similar amenities to some of the parks.
Right. I think there is some opportunity there as the parks have limited staff and their visitor centers are closed. There is the opportunity to have the visitors, go out of the park and get to these Indigenous-owned businesses that may still be open and benefit from the revenue that would come in from these visitors.
The American Indigenous Tourism Association, what types of work are you folks doing right now in terms of providing any sort of guidance or support for any of these tribal communities right now that are specifically struggling because of access to tourism or tourism-related challenges in light of the shutdown?
Well, we continue to provide education and guidance to our members and our constituents as they weather this shutdown. We're doing this. We're coming together actually this next week in Mississippi at our American Indigenous Tourism Conference, where we'll be discussing some of these topics, how important it is for us to collaborate and to share information with each other. One of the things that we're going to be talking about is the Beyond Borders Tourism Coalition. It's a coalition of tourism entities on both sides of the U.S. and Canadian border where many of our Indigenous-owned businesses are and really rely on travelers coming across those borders. And one of the things that we've talked about is as Indigenous people, we never had borders before. We have family and friends on both sides of the border. And so for us, it's important to have that Indigenous voice at that level and on this coalition to give our perspective to the industry and how important it is, not only for the industry at large, but for Indigenous tourism. Right now, the U.S. Travel Association is estimating that our industry is losing $1 billion every week, disrupting travel across this nation. And so when you look at those types of numbers and then you look at Indigenous tourism, it's when our industry is impacted as Indigenous tourism, we're impacted tenfold as compared to that.
Now, as I understand it, there's some U.S. Forest Service funding to support tribal communities. Can you talk about that?
Right. So we partnered with the U.S. Forest Service, and it's been a partnership now for several years. And so the U.S. Forest Service has received Native Act funds, and we've been able to assist with grants out to tribes to help to build their capacity for tourism, several different projects across the nation in the different regions across the nation. So it's really that funding, it's something that wasn't there before and allows us to help tribes in Indigenous tourism.
Now, you folks also sent out a survey a couple of weeks ago. Tell us more about that survey and what type of data are you hoping to uncover?
Well, what we were looking at is the impact of the policies that have been put in place, or a lot of the rhetoric that is out there, and how it's impacting tourism, our Indigenous-owned tourism businesses. And so what we're seeing is that there is a significant decrease in travel and people coming to our destinations and experiences, meetings that have been canceled, so affecting night stays at our casino resorts, especially along the Canadian-U.S. border. They rely on us, and we rely on them for visitation and those visitor dollars. So we're definitely seeing large impacts, and I'm going to be able to share more of that data at our conference next week.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. I want to go back to Larry Wright Jr. with the National Congress of American Indians. And Larry, we mentioned before break, we are in the 21st day of the government shutdown. It looks like this shutdown could potentially break the record that was set about 7 years ago. And I want to ask you, what lessons did we learn from that last long government shutdown, and how can those be applied to the current situation we're in?
Well, I think, either situation is not ideal for sure. And tribes, regardless, are impacted differently at different moments in that time. And, there are some tribes that are very fortunate to have diversified economies where they can weather a short-term shutdown, relatively speaking, as we're talking now, 21 days into it. But you have other tribes that may not have those kind of resources to be able to do that, and have already taken measures that they've had to look at their own programs and make some critical decisions that have a true impact, immediate impact on how they take care of their tribal citizens. We're fortunate to be in a situation where Indian Health Service and BIE are programs that have advanced appropriations that are able to continue services. But when we talk about those kinds of things compared to BIA funding, that isn't, it's still a discretionary line item in the federal budget, which it shouldn't be. I mean, all funding for Indian country should be mandatory and advanced in its awards. But those kind of decisions where tribes are starting, will start feeling the effects to identify programs that are critical in nature for them, and may have to shut down programs and go into rifts or furloughs themselves. And that has an immediate and devastating impact in Indian country. And so, again, tribes aren't monolithic. They all come at these situations in different places, but the effects are real. But Indian country stands together to make sure that, if it can affect one tribe, it can affect all tribes.
All right. Thank you, Larry. I want to go back to Kim Pate with Indian Fund. And Kim, earlier in the show, you drew a comparison to what we're seeing now with the Assets for Independence program, a federally managed program that impacted or benefited a lot of Native communities with savings accounts and match savings accounts and things of that nature. Have you ever seen anything like this, though, so specifically where Native all CDFIs, but specifically Native CDFIs we're talking about today, have been threatened to this extent?
Not really. And part of this is because the federal government has a trust responsibility, really, that's not optional to tribes. And it's enshrined in treaties that are over 200 years old. So it doesn't feel like it aligns with the values of this country to now target native CDFIs the way we've been targeted. And this comes at a time when we've already received a $28 million appropriation for our Native American CDFI Assistance Program, or NACA. So those funds were appropriated. To Larry's point, right? Like, some programs have to go through Congress and get their appropriations each year, and that happened for the CDFI fund. And so right now the administration is effectively withholding 86% of those funds, which is around $24 million. So we never expected anything like this. And in fact, it hasn't actually happened before in Indigenous programs. So we're working really hard, and we are so thankful for the support of NCAI, as well as the Native CDFI Network, which is our advocacy membership organization. And I am so thankful, too, that we're going to have a chance to go to D.C. as part of NCN's annual summit in December, and go to talk with the agencies, if they're open, members of Congress, when we're all there for our legislative day on December 10th. So we're working really hard to shine a light on this and show that this shouldn't be happening and has never really happened like this before.
Thank you, Kim. Dave Tovey with Nichyawe Community Financial Services. What are you going to be paying most attention to in the days and weeks ahead? And what is foremost on the mind of not just you, but your Native CDFI colleagues?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Kim just detailed is a good one. As you probably already know, the Opportunity Finance Network, which is pretty much the membership organization for most of the 1,400 some odd total CDFIs, are meeting in D.C., and a lot of our Native CDFI colleagues are there. Looking forward to getting their reports when they get back, but I think all of us are just going to be tracking what's happening, trying to encourage our elected representatives to stand up and support us. But I think this has the bite of, I mentioned the greenhouse gas fund and other things. I mean, we've had grant agreements signed, competed for, and won by organizations, either of our local or national organizations, and then it being pulled back. I mean, it's, I don't like to make light of it too much, but, talk about fork-tongued diplomacy. Here we've done everything the right way, done it by the book, got things approved, and then because there's some kind of political policy fiat that has to be changed, that sometimes purposefully or unfortunately includes tribes or Native organizations, we get lumped into it. And it's just, it's just so frustrating. This last year has been just, every day is a new weird thing.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation today here on Native America Calling. But first, I want to thank all of our guests who joined the conversation today: Larry Wright Jr., Sherry Rupert, Dave Tovey, and Kim Pate. And we will be back tomorrow with an interview with longtime activist Leonard Peltier. He spoke with us from his home on the Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota. Until then, I'm Sean Spruce. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Skugtash. For more than 40 years, Ramona Farms has revived ancient traditional foods, tepary beans, pinoli, polentas, and more, all from store.ramonafarms.com. Ramona Farms supports this show. Omye.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.